All right, so we're going to pivot a little bit now away from thinking strictly about AI, ML, and data-related stuff to think more globally about our use of data, data ethics, and data sovereignty. And we have a group that will be presenting here in this session, including Jeff Weber, Dennis Dye, and Peter Romine? Romine, all right, excellent. Welcome, come on up.
There we go. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dennis Dye. I'm with Southwestern Indian Polytechnic Institute, or SIPI, in Albuquerque. And yeah, this will be a joint presentation with my collaborator, Jeff Weber, and my other collaborator, of course, Peter Weber is in the back there. So we would like to share with you our project, our NSF-sponsored project, to develop a sovereign digital network. And it's really aimed at addressing some very serious, significant issues on data ethics and data sovereignty in Indian country today. And our project, shown here, the title is Sovereign Network System for Environmental Monitoring, Data and Information Exchange, and Collaboration among TCUs, tribal colleges and universities. And as you can see here, we're starting out as a demonstration project, starting out small with a network of our two TCUs together with UCAR here in Boulder. And what we're doing, the aim is to leverage these incredibly powerful and sophisticated tools that have been developed here by Unidata, leverage them to the benefit of tribal colleges, of tribal nations, specifically for addressing some of these problems of data ethics and data sovereignty and data governance that tribal nations are facing today. And the overall network or system itself is summarized here. Again, the network, the initial network on the right, and on the left you can see major components of that network with the beginning from environmental monitoring, our initial context, with at each node a weather station that relays data wirelessly into a Ramada server that's dedicated to this project, and then links to the internet by a satellite internet connection, which is critical for us, particularly for many tribes in remote locations where the available internet connectivity is really inadequate. So we're demonstrating not only the system here in terms of Ramada and the sovereign network, but also technologies and tools that are becoming increasingly available to connect tribal nations in remote areas to the greater data ecosystem. So when I refer to data sovereignty, indigenous data sovereignty, this is really the simple definition: the right of indigenous peoples and nations to govern the collection, ownership, and application of their own data. Now remember, tribal nations are sovereign nations within the United States, government-to-government relations with the federal US government. And this right is not necessarily fully recognized or realized on both sides. And although increasingly it's recognized and increasingly there are efforts put in place to achieve true indigenous data sovereignty. But our project is designed and intended and aimed at really facilitating that process for tribal colleges and tribal nations to begin being more effective and efficient in realizing these goals of data sovereignty. So, FAIR and CARE, these are sets of principles, guiding principles that have been established. FAIR, really addressing the general concerns of data accessibility, not necessarily only for indigenous peoples, indigenous communities, but also more recently layered on to FAIR principles are the CARE principles, which are in fact, more focused on the concerns and needs of indigenous communities, collective benefits, authority to control, responsibility and ethics, care. Now, all of these principles, they're well worth, if those of you are not familiar with them, I think it's well worth becoming familiar with them, and we don't have time to delve in depth into them here, but I do encourage you to be aware of this website, the Global Indigenous Data Alliance, with a link there. And when you have time, check it out. Become familiar with the key terms and the concerns and what needs to be addressed, really, but among all of us, to address these issues of data sovereignty and fairness, not only among Native American tribes, but really indigenous communities the world over. So let's focus back in on our project and what's motivating us. Well, on the top you can see the distribution of federally recognized tribal lands, reservation lands in the United States, primarily concentrated in the West. Of course, there's a tragic history and trauma underlying the distribution, location, existence of these reservation lands. We won't go into that today, but again, worth recognizing and understanding and being aware of, because really that's the background. When we're talking about tribal nations and data sovereignty, there's a lot behind this. But let's bring it into the climate context for this meeting. Of course, many of the tribes are in the West, and including in the Southwest, where SIPI is located. And this is the 3-month precipitation outlook from about a year ago. Much different situation than today, or at least in June 2023. But of course, in the West, in the Southwest, we are in a persistent drought. So we have some relief this year. Doesn't mean that it's changing. We're still in a long-term persistent drought. And so this, of course, is impacting tribal communities throughout the West. And so access to information, to climate data, to weather data, better understanding of what are the climate dynamics occurring on tribal lands is a priority. It's a priority for tribal governments, a priority for indigenous communities across the country. So data, information. Now the challenge is that when we look at the distribution of surface observing sites across the nation, this is the pattern that you find. Now this is really the full set of level 1 and also cooperative stations, so kind of the maximum sustained observation network of networks. But one of the things that stands out is, by and large, tribal nations are not well represented. They're undersampled. And so we can focus in the Four Corners region, where you see Navajo Nation, the largest reservation land area there. Again, relative to the rest, especially higher populated areas, undersampled. So there's a lot of interest, not only among the tribe, but outside groups and entities to get more data to improve weather forecasting. There's valid motivations for increasing observations on tribal lands. The challenge arises, however, when we recognize that, well, there's growing interest in collecting data on, for example, the Navajo reservation, but how is that done at the same time as respecting tribal sovereignty, data sovereignty? Well, this is what our project is about. It's really to acknowledge these concerns and to leverage Unidata resources initially to begin addressing those challenges. So this kind of summarizes what the challenge is, that of course there's a tremendous amount of data collected on tribal lands, weather, and other data. There's also other types of information of high value to tribes that need to be protected. But at the same time, you can think of it in terms of a leaky bucket, that despite the priorities for data sovereignty and data governance, we're looking at a leaky bucket, that in many cases data is just flowing out without control, without even recognition, and going in many directions to outside entities and organizations who are very happy and very eager to receive that data. So you can actually think of each of those streams of the outside group kind of collecting those data flows independent of the tribal government or tribal agencies, for example. So simply put, our project is really aimed at applying, you can think of it as spigots to those, plugging those holes and allowing the tribal governments, the tribal leaders, the tribal communities to control what goes out, but also what comes back in. And so this is what our project is about. So again, we're beginning in the context of environmental monitoring. However, we want to emphasize that the scope, the potential scope of this sovereign digital network is much broader. It's not limited to environmental data. As Jeff has put well described it as data agnostic. Ramada, the system is data agnostic. But we want to demonstrate it initially in the context of weather data, environmental data that we're familiar with, and then provide the platform for expansion. Just quickly, a couple of examples. This is our SIPI campus, a low oblique aerial image where you can see the location out in our agricultural field, a 30-foot, a 10-meter weather tower that is going to be linked to wireless sensors that feed in data, for example, to support precision ag, soil moisture, and so forth. That's connected by a point-to-point Ethernet bridge, microwave bridge, to our building where our Ramada server will be located, and again, connected up to our other network nodes through a Starlink satellite internet connection. So this is our SIPI campus. Likewise, we're building simply a duplicate station network node at Navajo Technical University in Crown Point. So where do we go from here? So our aims, our objectives are to first complete our demonstration, show the capabilities, and then follow on with a second project under NSF funding where we intend to expand the network among other tribal colleges and hopefully as well as tribal agencies, tribal governments. And a big part of that will be training, providing training and workshops to facilitate that, providing support to TCUs and tribes as they stand up their systems. But we can also think about the broader implications and benefits of this network. Not only will it facilitate data sovereignty, data governance, it will also enhance resources available to tribal colleges and tribal communities for STEM education. So access to tremendous amount of data, many of which, data types we're seeing here. So exciting data coming out of NCAR. So immediate access to that, local applications for research supporting student projects at TCUs. We're very excited about where this is headed, and we're very fortunate to Jeff Weber in particular for opening to Peter and I at TCUs this window into Unidata and just incredible things that you all are doing here at the forefront of data science and earth system science. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my collaborator, Jeff Weber.
Thanks, Dennis. Oh, thank you, Dennis. That was a great introduction and a great presentation. I'd like to take a moment here to thank the Users Committee, Tanya and Nicole, and the entire Unidata staff for this tremendous workshop that they've put on. So thank you so much for the opportunity to describe our sovereign network to the group. I'm going to do a live demo of the Ramada system at this point in time, so I'm sure the network will go down. It's the way it works. But before I do that, I'd like to highlight a point here. There's oftentimes confusion about open data and data sovereignty. And in the past, we've had committee members ask us, well, in the past, Unidata has always been a champion for free and open access to all data. We were often asking forgiveness instead of permission in the past. Data sovereignty is not opposed to open data. So just because we're claiming data sovereignty over tribal colleges and the data that they collect or the data that is collected on that property or on that nation doesn't mean it's not going to be shared. It's going to be shared when it's appropriate to be shared. It's just that the accreditation needs to be in place, that this data was taken from a sovereign nation, that we're using it in this sense. And so it is not orthogonal at all to open data. It's just that proper accreditation needs to be in place and that the data needs to be shared where it's appropriate to be shared and kept sovereign when it's not appropriate to be shared. So thank you for that point. We're going to go to this URL here on motherlode.ucard.edu as the Ramada server. Now, let me see if I can escape out of this. Go up to here. Okay, great. As Dennis had mentioned, our systems are not quite up yet. We're expecting all the data to be flowing sometime midsummer. So what we have here are demonstration examples of what the data will look like. Now, in the previous days, we've had a lot of discussion about taking a first look at data. As it comes in, take a look at the data and see if there's anything exciting there. Is this something that I might want to study? It might not be the final publication graphic that you're getting ready to produce, but it's a nice way to take a look at the data sets to see if something exciting is happening. And so in that sense, one of our collaborative projects with Dr. Peter Romine at Navajo Technical University is the Healthy Hogan Project, which is a NASA project. And it's looking at smoke buildup inside the Hogan and what atmospheric conditions might help evacuate that air or keep it lidded. Maybe there's a small cap on top of the boundary layer. So in coordination with this effort, Julian and Anna at Unidata are running a high-resolution WRF model over the Navajo Nation, and we'll be able to move those stability indice parameters to Navajo Technical University so that they can look at the efficiency of how smoke is being evacuated out of those Hogans. Now, what we have in lieu of the Hogans, first of all, the Healthy Hogan project will not be publicly available because it contains identifiable information about the Hogans and who lives there. So, but in lieu of that, let's go here to what this would look like. Now, in Ramada, you can define a data type. And so once any data of that data type enters the Ramada system, there's already a way to visualize that data, which is very handy. So for example, here are some purple air sensors around the Albuquerque area. They have a public API. We were able to grab that. And if you were to go and take a look at the map, everybody loves maps, right? A sense of place. We can click on this purple air sensor, and we can, I've got some screens, let me get rid of this one. That's not very attractive, let's go to this one. And you can see it immediately loads the data. And we have a couple of days time, and it's current to now. Now, you say, well, that's kind of hard to look at that graph. It's kind of, you can drill down, you can go right to that actual individual station, and you can look at, as our network comes around with the data, you can look at individual parameters, and you can change these parameters. Say, well, maybe that's not what I want to look at. Of course, the live demo. And I can change which parameters I'm going to take my quick look at. There we go. It's a little slow. And I can change whether I want the 2.5 or the 10 or the 1.0 millimeter count. So again, we have this very useful way to immediately look at data sets once they arrive on your system. A gentleman over here was accessing some GOES 16 data from a Ramada system. And so with, I believe, was that Python that you were using? Yeah. And so these files now are in this repository. You can use Python scripts or other types of data visualization tools that you wish to access if you see an exciting event. Like maybe, I don't know if my mouse shows up, but you can see like maybe some of these spikes. And maybe I want to look at that in more detail. Maybe I want to combine that with a satellite image. So this is a wonderful way to get that nice first look of what's going on with the data in your system. Now, we're also having these CR1000 Campbell data loggers on our WMO towers. Other people in the Unidata community have done this type of work in the past. Central Michigan University is doing the same thing. But once that data comes in from the data logger in real time via that microwave bridge, you have the ability to look at the output. And again, this is probably not going to be your final product, but it lets you know, one, that the system's up and running, that the sensors are working, and also it gives you an idea on if there's an exciting event going on. And additionally, you can provide this URL, make it publicly available so that the communities that you're serving can have access to this real-time weather data. Back. Now, once you've got a couple of these displays going, through the Ramada Wiki facility, you can combine them. And so you can start getting the story being told. You know, here's some spikes in PM 2.5. Well, is there anything going on at the airport? Is there any other weather things? Or is there wind speeds that might bring that smoke or those particle levels to your site? And so it starts giving you an idea of being able to look at these traces. Well, is there a story to be told? Well, we can see some diurnal fluxes, and we can see some of these PM 2.5 events, but they're not very well lined up, so they might be very local to that station. And given the context of this workshop being about storytelling, again, having these combined displays of different data sets really enables you to kind of get that texture and weave that story. Now, I'm going to go one more step and show you how not only can you weave data that you've collected, but you can also add additional data sets that aren't locally gathered. They can even include YouTube videos or Wikipedia articles. And so as we continue to talk about the persistent drought in the desert Southwest and the effect it has on Lake Powell, there are data sets and there are Wikipedia articles and YouTube videos, news stories. And so you can start telling a story about Lake Powell with imagery, data sets, and so on that are live, interactive, and exportable. And given this context of being able to combine disparate data sets to tell a story, I think is incredibly valuable. Data by itself are just bits, right? And I'll hearken back to Robert Orr, the founder of NCAR, and his mantra is science serving society. We have to keep in mind why we're doing this science. We're doing this science to benefit society and benefit communities that we are closely working with. And being able to tell a story and make the data that we collect relevant to those communities and hopefully have benefits for those communities, such as the healthy Hogan, when to burn inside the Hogan and when not to. And how can we convey that information from the high resolution WRF that our Jetstream 2 group here at Unidata are providing for us. Ramada will also help parse out the parameters that are needed for each individual site. The WRF run is large, it's very big. A lot of these TCUs have restricted bandwidth. So we're going to take the stability indices and put those to NTU. We're going to take the surface parameters and send those to SIPI. And hydrologic parameters might be more valuable to people, for example, at Nebraska Indian Community College who are collecting data on the Missouri River. So having the Ramada platform as a way to aggregate this data, share this data, and then the sovereign aspect of data access. The Ramada server can allow you to go to an individual IP, a block of IPs, a campus, a community, or opening it up to the public at large. And so having that access control and having a network in place where tribal colleges and universities can share their data sets with other tribal colleges and universities openly and freely within the sovereign network without making them publicly available is an incredible advancement for tribal colleges and universities to do interdisciplinary science. And I am thankful and blessed to be a part of this group with Dr. Romine and Dr. Dye. I think there's a lot of potential here, and I look forward to any questions that the audience might have.
Questions for the presenters?
Hey, great talk. Also, Dennis, great talk. About Ramada, a couple of things, a couple questions. First of all, who develops Ramada? I know that there's some history behind it, but I forget what it is.
Yeah, Ramada was originally developed at Unidata for the case study project that I was working on. Then we used it for the Teaching Resource Network, which never really took hold, but a lot of curriculum and pedagogical resources for people to share. It is now open sourced. It is being actively developed by Geode Systems. Jeff McWhorter is the president of Geode Systems and a former Unidata employee. So it is open source, freely available, and still being fully supported by the community and primarily by Geode Systems. Great question.
And just another quick question. You mentioned that there was some Python interactions that you can have with Ramada. Is there a Python module that has that, or how does that work?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by how does it work. These are data sets on a file system, so it would work like any other data set on a file system. However, Ramada does have the capability to run as a Jupyter Hub, so you could use that as a feature. So.
Siphon package that we make gives you access to pull data from threads or other sources. Is there a similar library that interacts with Ramada?
Not that I'm aware of.
Other questions? Anything from Aaron?
So I'm actually going to be installing some instruments on tribal lands later this month, and so I already emailed them the website. I see there's contact information on there. Is that their best bet to just fill out the form and send an email saying, hey, we've got this data, we need help? Or is there a more direct line I can give them to?
My email is a great way to start.
Okay.
I'd be happy to engage with, I hope I already know these people.
Sitting Bull College.
Yeah, sure. We're doing a lot of work in North Dakota, primarily with Ogallala Lakota College, but also with Sitting Bull. That's great, and that's where our expansion in the next phase in 2024 will be focusing, is in the Dakotas and the Upper Missouri Basin. So, Aaron, this is great. I'd look forward to working with you and collaborating.
Is there any efforts for like tribes that don't have colleges, like the Utes here in Colorado?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as Dennis was previously mentioning, this is at the inception focusing with tribal colleges and universities. But due to the fact that the Ramada platform is data agnostic, our hopes is that nations and tribal governments will also be able to take advantage of this facility to move data within their organization in a sovereign manner.
Yeah, and I would say that we do a lot of outreach projects with K-12, and so and we actually had this kind of question in a meeting from tribal members that didn't have a tribal college. And I said that it was really in our desire that we can inspire young Native Americans anywhere to understand that they could become data scientists in their tribe, and because education is now democratized, I would say, through Zoom, right, in particular. And so, and there's all kinds of people now offering workshops, and so no, I think this, and that's it. And the thing is, we're really thinking indigenous, so we don't want it to be just Navajo, just Native Americans, but also Native Alaskans and Hawaiian Islanders, and then ultimately people in Mongolia and New Zealand and all over the world, because the colonization that went on that led to the massacre, basically, almost total annihilation of the Native American and North America and South America. Like I said, it brought a bunch of bad stuff, and so essentially being sensitive and caring about the sovereignty thing is important, because these people have been exploited, and since white man first came to America, in New Zealand and Hawaii and Alaska and so forth and so on. And so I just think, like I said, we just have a really great opportunity. We have a great time in history where we have funding that wants to do this kind of stuff, and so I said it's really cool for me to come to this kind of meeting and just see a room full of people that really want to see these kind of stuff be successful. But no, I think it's, for us, for the Navajo people and for most Native Americans, and I would say underrepresented people in general, a lot of they're underrepresented because they don't have examples that look like them. like I said, I sort of took pictures of like this room, right? I mean, there's a lot of underrepresentation here, or basically not here, and so it's the whole thing about intentionality, and so I just think no tribal college could have ever done what we're doing by themselves, and so I think that's the key word, right? Is partnerships and teamwork and interdisciplinary and all those kind of things. So, except my unprepared part of the presentation.
All right, thank you very much. Let's thank our speakers once more.